Right, looks like that is happening. And I just want to offer a brief introduction on behalf of the Teach-In Collective before handing things over to the real event today, which is Beyond Disability Accommodations, Access, Solidarity, Justice. Um, so again, welcome to everybody. Thank you all for being here. Um, I am delighted to see everyone who was able to show up and to introduce the first Teach-In event of spring 2023. Yes, Alexandra, by all means. So I'm Ashley Barnes. I teach literature at the School of Arts, Humanities, and Technology at University of Texas, Dallas. And I am a member of the Teach-In Collective. That is a group of students, staff, and faculty who help organize events like this one. We bring together activists, scholars, artists from the DFW area and beyond, with the aim of interrogating and responding to past and present forms of injustice that affect the UT Dallas campus and its communities. Past events from the Teach-In have focused on issues like border policing, women's rights, and the protests in Iran last fall, housing insecurity on campus, and many, many more. We encourage you, if you're at all curious, to go look at the archive of our past events on our YouTube page. And I believe that link will be posted in the chat. Our next event, I'll just give a quick heads up, is on Friday, April 14th on environmental justice, and that will be happening at noon on Teams, I believe. If you would like to join our efforts or support this work, we heartily encourage you to do that. We rely on the generosity of donors to make these kinds of events possible. And we would love to see any of you at one of our meetings or just to hear feedback or ideas from you. So please consider donating to the Teach-In Collective. That is a link you can find in the chat. And please sign up for our mailing list so that you can stay in the loop. And you will also find that link in the chat. So I think that is all from me. I will hand things over to Olivia Banner, who is the lead organizer for this event. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ashley. Everyone can hear me? Great. My name is Olivia Banner. I'm an associate professor of critical media studies in ATech. And I'm going to begin. So first, I'd like to do a land acknowledgement. UT Dallas stands on land originally settled and occupied by the Caddo, Wichita, and Comanche people. We recognize the legacy of colonization and the harm caused by the forced removal of Indigenous people from these lands. UT Dallas continues to benefit from the contributions of Indigenous students and employees on our campus. Also, I'd like to state our appreciation for the time that you've all allocated to being in discussion with us, especially during this time of continued pandemic exhaustion. I'd like to note that yesterday, 400 Americans died of COVID-19. Of the approximately 900,000, just to repeat, that's 900,000 reported cases of COVID for the past month, 10 to 30% of those will acquire long COVID. 23 million Americans, it is estimated, already have long COVID. So I didn't mention these numbers to depress you. We actually appear to have a slight decrease in deaths. But because I want to highlight, to begin this teach-in, the history of long COVID itself. It was due to the persistent efforts of patients with long COVID who organized and networked and compiled all the data necessary to do so that something remarkable was achieved. They got the NIH, the National Institute of Health, and the American medical establishment to name and recognize a new illness. Because of their work, a diagnosis of long COVID now qualifies students for disability accommodations, something that I'm sure Carrie Tate might have more to say about. For anyone who goes through the process of getting sick, of never fully recovering, of visiting multiple doctors with no known treatments, of acquiring the diagnosis, and finally of receiving accommodations, we can thank these extraordinary networks of sick people, as well as our own Office of Accessibility. However, what if we lived in a world where parts of that process of receiving what disability studies scholar Ellen Samuels has named biocertification, that is, having one's status as disabled recognized and validated by medical and educational experts, what if that duty did not fall to individuals? What would it mean to live in a world and to receive an education in spaces already designed with access in mind? What if our material structures and our immaterial ones, such as the one we are using today, already anticipated disabled people? What if it didn't take a pandemic and the exhausting effort of organizing while having long COVID to force the official scientific arm of the US government to recognize an illness and to set the stage for its biocertification by medical professionals? What if it didn't take a pandemic for everyone, disabled or not, to relax attendance requirements, or to open up new modalities for accessing higher ed or for medical and mental health care? What if every event included an ASL interpreter from the start, rather than asking that individual people make that request of the event organizers? So these are some of the questions that we're going to be talking about in more detail today. I want to just, before I open up the floor to some of our other participants, I want to just clarify our title for anyone who might need a little more background on the terms that we're using. So first of all, the idea contained in the words, in the phrase, going beyond accommodations, is one that's been developed for about 2 decades now. This is not a new idea, and we will hear how it has circulated already throughout the university. Second, the term access. What we will all be talking about here today is thinking about access as an issue of cross-solidarity. So that's the second term in our title, solidarity. All of us are affected by ableism, whether in our present situation or in a future in which we will all eventually become disabled in one way or another. Access is about collective work, not individual work. And so our third term, justice. A lot of the work that we will be drawing on today and talking about draws from disability justice activism, which understands that ableism harms people in different ways since it maps onto other structural forces determining one's life chances. Disability justice asks that everyone contribute to a collective movement to redesign our worlds so that we lift up those most affected by interlocking oppressions of racism, for example, of heteropatriarchy, for example, with ableism. And so with that short introduction, I'm just going to go ahead and let our 2 graduate student participants take the floor. I'm going to introduce them first. I'd also like to note that while people are speaking, as I see fit, I may drop some links to other sorts of resources that everybody can access that I hope will, I think there will be many questions and people may find some of this intriguing and want to pursue additional resources. So I'll be putting those in the chat. Okay, so to introduce our graduate student participants, we have Cynthia O'Neill, who is a ABD in the School of ATEC, getting a PhD. And we have Samantha Wellwood, who is also a PhD candidate in the School of ATEC. And they are going to be sharing with us some of their experiences, as well as their understanding of disability studies. And just to let everybody know, I am serving on both of their dissertation committees. And I think that we have a great couple of graduate students here to tell us about their experiences and their knowledge at UT Dallas. So I'm not sure, Cynthia or Sammy, who would like to go first. Okay, I'll also state that I'm possibly going to ask them some questions to draw out other insights from them. So who would like to go first?
I can go first. So, I am a person who has been engaged in disability studies without knowing it. Dr. Banner actually helped me sort of name that process as I came to ATEC, from my artwork to just sort of how I was engaging in my daily life. I live with a chronic illness where sometimes I'm more able-bodied, sometimes I'm more disabled, depending on what is occurring that day. But that has been a huge issue for me in attending institutions, because there are different needs that have to be met that don't necessarily check the accommodation boxes that exist in an institution already. So this has been a big passion of mine of how can we rethink collaborative spaces and care networks and things of that nature. And for me, I really respond well to crip theory, which is an outgrowth of disability studies that asks us to consider more, in addition to the physical body, we also think about crip bodies, crip body mind. So various mental illness, neurodivergence. I like the term neurospicy. That's been a new fun way of responding to those kinds of things. And it makes space for chronic illness, but it also makes space for opening up the larger socio-political conversation of access, where we think beyond heteronormative, androcentric ideas, and how can we include more people? How can we include mothers and women and minorities and things of that nature? So I guess I'll pause there and let Sammy say hi.
Thanks, Cynthia, and Dr. Banner. Hi. My area of disability studies is really focused on design. So how we design spaces and how we conceptualize this idea of accessibility. Oftentimes, designers are designing around bodies, not with bodies. So what that means is that we are designing environments that are based on math and based on like anthropometric figures. So how big a body, an average body is in space, and basing a set of design principles or our designs off of those design principles. Sorry. And so this impacts every disabled body, but there, like Cynthia was saying, there are a lot of people who do not fall under this umbrella of disability immediately because they don't look disabled. So invisible disability. And in some cases, it's just about reframing our beliefs and our ideas about bodies. So fat studies came under disability studies kind of recently. The fat liberation movement started in the 60s and 70s, and probably like in the mid 90s, it was really starting to be folded into the disability studies scholarship. And so what fat studies does is it frames the fat body as having the same accessibility issues as disabled bodies, and reframes it in that way so that we could start talking about how to design systems, and that's very broadly construed. So not just the physical environment, but other systems that bodies get pulled into that accommodate for larger fat bodies. And just to kind of like piggyback off of what Dr. Banner was saying about COVID, if you think back to the beginning days of COVID and how the rhetoric was really shaped around fat people being at risk, and then it morphed into very quickly a rhetoric of blaming fat people for spreading COVID and for keeping COVID around. So it's very, there's a lot of factors in this as far as like when we talk about bodies and when we talk about fat bodies as being disabled. So yeah, I guess that's where I am coming at this conversation from.
Thanks, both of you, I wonder, I'm just going to jump in and ask you some questions. I'm wondering, Cynthia, if you would be willing to talk about having had a baby during the pandemic and the ways in which being disabled and then also becoming a new mother, the kinds of challenges that you faced in considering your own high risk status during pregnancy, for example, and questions around what kind of accommodations you might be able to get. Or, so I guess the broader question for me is thinking about, you know, at its broadest level, is the university designed for pregnant, disabled people, or has it been designed with someone else as the sort of normative student and teacher in mind? Because of course you're both a graduate student and you're a teacher.
Yeah, so the short answer is no, it is not designed with a disabled pregnant mother in mind, especially if she is in this cross space of being both the graduate student and the teacher. So I was a very high risk pregnancy given my chronic illness and other things that I was facing. And I was really concerned about postpartum time and what this was going to look like as we entered the new school year, and also leaving the previous year. So I ended up giving birth in June, so I was concerned about coming in August, but also the spring prior being so high risk, worrying about exposure and things like that. And there are a lot of factors, as we all know, that we're pushing for us to be fully back in person. And that was constantly choosing to, or being asked to put my body at risk. And when looking for accommodation, what would happen is I wasn't quite a student and I wasn't quite faculty. So I ended up in this gray space where I was just pushed into one wall or another and couldn't get the answers I needed or the access or support that I needed. So that's at the larger institutional scale. There's not a space for especially new mothers or pregnant women or pregnant persons. And so that was really challenging. But what happened is there's a smaller care network of people who really worked hard to make sure that I was able to attend things in a way that I needed to. They supported me in the way that I needed to. So there's a fantastic group of peers and professors who assisted me beyond what the institution would do. So they began to imagine, I guess, this future or this way the institution could be with me, and allowed me to continue to be here. And I think without their support and that care network, the institution would have been the roadblock that stopped me from continuing my education. And so I think there is mostly support for a normative student. I don't think that the pregnant woman is imagined. You know, we had to ask for lactation space, which thankfully was sorted out but wasn't fully available. We had not every door in ATEC is accessible. So you have to go to specific doors. There's also not ramps everywhere. You have to walk in the street to get to inside the building. I'm saying this from working with a stroller. I don't have the experience of working with a wheelchair, but these are things that kind of overlap, which is important to think about when we're creating access as an institution. It's not just for disabled bodies, it's for all sorts of circumstances. And me walking around with the stroller really sort of highlighted conversations I've already had with other students about how hard it actually is to get into this building. There's one restroom to change a baby's diaper there, and it's not on every floor. There's only one changing station. So there's odd things like that, where the space just it's not meant for this experience. And then as we went into the new semester this past fall, not this one, yes, this one, sorry, it's all a blur. That, you know, there was a lot of argument about how can we get supported. There's no FMLA for a grad student unless you're willing to give up your stipend. So there's no kind of financial support like that if you choose to have a child. But also in the state of Texas, if you find out that you are pregnant, you're having that child. You unless you have support networks to get you out of this state, typically you don't know till 6 weeks, and the laws that are in place here sort of force that. So there's multiple barriers that are sort of determining the future for people in pregnancy that kind of like say, no, you can't be in education, or no, you can't do that. You know, and you hear a lot of horror stories in some of my support groups where people are literally told to drop out of their program. So thankfully, I found a care network outside of the administrative level of the institution that really helped me not have to face that. But I'll stop there if you have any questions.
Thanks, Cynthia. I'm sure Carrie Tate and Yvette Pearson might have more insights into this because, of course, right, part of this is a process of, right, in disability studies, we talk about the fact that we're retrofitting, right, an institution that has not been built, right, with our wide diversity of, right, students and faculty in mind. So if there's a tension between the legal aspect of all of this, and then of course, the sort of the ways in which the ways in which actually the Texas law, of course, right? And then of course the ADA and other kinds of legal mechanisms at the institution that ensure, accommodations for people, but of course are limited by the law themselves. So I'm sure we'll hear a little bit more about that in a moment. Let me ask Sammy, do you want to share a little bit about your own experience? One thing we hoped with this teach-in is that also perhaps, how do I put, we want everybody to learn more about this issue, and we're hoping some of these ideas filter out both to students and to faculty. I don't know, Sammy, do you want to share the ways in which sort of very small and subtle components that are seen as also essential to courses, for example, the ways in which those can actually spiral into something different that, that people often don't think about?
Yes. So, all right. So when we think about accessibility, we often don't think about things like desks and chairs. So we have the belief that our desks and chairs, I'm just going to go straight into these examples, sorry. But that these desks and chairs are, because you can lift them, or maybe they have arms that swing out, many don't, that they're flexible. But quite honestly, it's not flexible enough. A lot of bodies that are bigger, or even just have varied needs, have a hard time accommodating or having their bodies accommodated by the structure of the classroom. And this can include things like, the projector and not being able to see the projector, but it's also a matter of comfort. The retention rate for people who are fat, like fat students, is actually pretty abysmal. I think it's like something in 30% of most institutions. Like that is the retention rate for fat students, because the classroom itself provides a significant barrier depending on what it's like. So thinking about how we can make our spaces more flexible, how we can offer those kinds of different options in seating for people, for example. Personally, as far as like the way that the university has impacted me, there's been a couple of things. So I mentioned early on with COVID, they really stressed the idea that fat people were at higher risk, and then also they were at higher risk of giving it to other people. And so when I was presented with the fact that I was being mandated to go into class and teach with students who didn't have to be masked, I contacted disability services just to see, because at this point I hadn't been diagnosed with my chronic illness. And so the only thing that I could have approached the university with as a documented disability was the fact that I was overweight. It was the fact that I was fat. And so I was like, well, this will be a fun experiment. So I had my doctor write a letter saying that all of the statistics, fat people are more likely to get COVID. They're more likely to die from COVID. All these things. And so, and she has this BMI, so she should be under the disabled umbrella and exempt from having to go teach in class with students that are unmasked. And the university said no. They said that is not a documented disability. And even though we are for years, we had been hearing about how fat people were at such great risk for dying from COVID. So I thought that was an interesting experience. And then there was another time where, again, I suffer from a chronic illness. And so I had received a syllabus for a class that I was really excited about taking. And at the bottom, it's with the attendance policy, it said, if you have chronic illness, do not take this class because you will miss too much information and you will fail the class. So it right there, it was just, that was like the very first time I've ever seen that on a syllabus, but it was, it was an open acknowledgement of a problem that happens all the time. Students with chronic illnesses fall behind and then it's impossible for them to catch up and they either have to drop the class or take the grade. So that's something that we often don't consider. And that happened right here on our campus at UTD.
Thanks, Sammy. I mean, one thing, of course, right, students with chronic illness don't have to fall behind. They don't have to leave the class, right? They're simply that the institution, faculty, right, need to be aware and recognize additional kinds of support or flexibility and so forth, right, that will help people to succeed. So, I think that was the only nice thing about the pandemic was that a lot of people, I think, have begun to be more aware about attendance, right, and assignment kinds of flexibility. Yeah, great, thank you. I wonder if perhaps Carrie and Yvette Pearson, if either of you would like to jump in here, because of course you have lots of information and you are part of the sort of recognized administrative part of this. We'd love to hear from you.
Thank you.
I will introduce you. Carrie Tate is the director of you changed the name recently. I'm going to mess this up.
Yes, it's Accessibility Resource Center, and we go by ARC.
Great, and thank you. Okay, yes, and Dr. Pearson, you are the Vice Provost of DEI.
Vice President.
Vice President, my apologies. Okay. Needed to have read your titles a little bit earlier, so it's great to have you here. If either of you want to jump in and just talk about your perspectives on everything.
One thing with long COVID, as all of us have just sat there and talked about in here, and we're learning more about long COVID. The way that it's identified with the ADA is that it has to be 6 months or more of a diagnosis. And so that's one thing that has been a challenge, because some individuals will be getting long COVID when they've been diagnosed 4 months. And so we try to work with the Dean of Students because that is temporary, but it also kind of falls under us a little bit. So we work hand in hand, and then that way it gets transitioned over to our office once it becomes more than 6 months, so that they can fall under the ADA. And in each one of the long COVID, it depends on what the diagnosis is and the functional limitation. So what may work for one person will not work for another person. So each is case by case. So we have to look at the documentation and then also determine what do they need. We do have some people that do have some neurological impact from COVID that has really limited their ability to even stand or sit in class. So we've had to make some accommodations for that. In regards to yours, Cynthia, for pregnancy, there is also the Title IX that you would fall under with the Title IX in the Gender Center, as well as our office and the Dean of Student. Laura Smith is the person that you would contact to work with anyone on pregnancy. And she also worked closely with our office if it transitioned that they do need to fall under the ADA. So I just wanted to make sure that you guys were aware of what services that we do have that can assist you. Please understand that there is a difference between accommodations and accessibility. Accessibility is, for everybody to walk through the front door at one time, but there are going to be some disabilities that may need accommodations on top of accessibility. And so our offices, that's what we do, is we try to provide what is individual accommodation that are needs that need to be met. Dr. Pearson, do you have any suggestions?
Sure. First of all, I really appreciate you sharing, both of you,
Absolutely.
and being so candid about your experiences. I've been over here cringing at those experiences, because that is, undue hardship, in my opinion. I think part of it, as Carrie said, part of it is a part of, what the legal requirements are. But one of the things that, and let me just backtrack and say this. I joined UT Dallas as VP in August of 2021. And so I've been here a little more than a year and a half. One of the very intentional things that we did over the past year as we reorganized was brought in accessibility under our umbrella, working with our partners in student affairs and in HR. And we renamed the office Accessibility Resource Center, again, with a lot of intentionality, because the vision is, and this just happened in September, so we're growing, and like I said, appreciate your feedback so that we can do a better job of ensuring accessibility. And I'll tell you, I also am disabled. I'm a wheelchair user, and I have little to no use of my right arm. And so there are a lot of barriers I encounter, from when I get up in the morning and need my mom to help me get dressed, to just navigating spaces every day, trying to navigate a wheelchair with one arm and do all the other things that go along with my day. So, um, so with that, one of the things that I am just constantly on a soapbox about is the difference between compliant and accessible. We are all going to be compliant. That's a minimum legal requirement. That's a floor, though. And so the conversations we've been having, whether it's through the Campus Accessibility Committee or with our partners in facilities and other areas of campus, is how can we take that next step to be more accessible? And how somebody put in the chat, universal design, user-centered, and universal design, as Samantha was getting to, are very critical to that happening. And so I will say that we are having those conversations. And now, actually, I just exchanged some emails this week, so that now when there are new projects planned for the campus, I personally will be at the very early discussion and design phase meetings. And I've also requested to be at the table if plans change or things like that. Bring us back so that we can look, because sometimes some decisions are made along the way and some things change, and stuff happens and it's like, well, we talked about this in the beginning, but something happened along the way and it went away. So being able to have a voice at the table with, again, that user-centered perspective, and I'm not saying as a wheelchair user that that's the end all be all, but it's a start. And I would bring that back to our community of voices and advisors, so that we can have different lenses, different experiences, different perspectives, helping to shape what that looks like. The other part is addressing what the current needs are. And so that's where your voices are so important. I have taken so many notes just from you talking these few minutes that will help inform us. But I also encourage folks to make sure you're using that report a barrier form, because I think sometimes we get so accustomed to things just not being right in the world that we just like, okay, it's another barrier, another day in the life, and we keep moving on. It's helpful for us to have that report a barrier form, which goes to our institutional compliance and equity and Title IX office, and ultimately to our campus accessibility committee, because it helps us get a sense of what people are experiencing, and helps us to say, hey, we need to put this forth as a priority and remedy it. And then the other thing I'll say, right now, the other place that we could really, really use your voice and others is there's a student experience survey that's going on right now. Just making sure that people share their experiences on that survey, because we really want to know how people are experiencing the campus. I know when we did the employee climate survey last spring, the data that we're looking at, accessibility is one of the top challenges that came out of that survey. And so we're not asking the questions just to be asking them. We're getting that information and figuring out, okay, what do we do about it, and putting actions and plans into action to make this a much more accessible campus. And like Carrie said, even with a universal design approach, we won't be able to have everything perfect for everybody, but what we want to do is make it as accessible for as many people as possible, and then attend to accommodations beyond that. So I'll just extend my office. If there's any way that we can be of assistance, of course, Carrie's office falls under that umbrella. Um, you can reach out to me personally. I've got a listening ear, and I'm here to help however I can, because I think having these voices, and the other thing is, uh, you know, I'm always, I guess, hyper vigilant about getting this type of input, because the challenge is, and I call it a tightrope walk, is that we have to hear the lived experiences, but sometimes reliving those experiences can be re-traumatizing. And so I just want to reiterate that I so appreciate you sharing these with us. And so I never want to put anyone in a position where it's traumatizing or re-traumatizing someone to provide that kind of feedback. So if we ever ask and it's too much, just say, I'm not good with that, and we're okay with that.
Thanks, Dr. Pearson. I wonder if Sammy or Cynthia, if either of you have thoughts that arose while we were listening to our two other participants, or anything else you'd like to share.
Yeah, I think so. One of the things that happens is this compliance or the legal conversation. Just like Sammy expressed, and I have a similar issue, that getting that diagnosis and getting that paperwork through isn't the easiest thing. You're asking, like myself, I live on the graduate stipend. I can't afford all the doctor visits that I need. you know, and to get the diagnosis, you have to see specialists. Well, sometimes those specialists are 3-4 months out, and even sometimes they can't fully say it. In an experience that I was having before my pregnancy, I have residual issues from a brain tumor. Well, my brain tumor is no longer present, so it is not my accommodation anymore. And the aftermath of what it has done to my physical pain and my ability to see, or my fatigue levels, they don't fall under a traditional diagnosis because it's the residuals of having that. It's not the actual thing itself. So there's no space in accommodation where I can get this thing that says, hey, like when this person is having a flare of these symptoms, they need accommodations in this way. I can't get that letter because I don't have this special diagnosis similar to what Sammy was trying to do. You know, we have to go through and the time alone that takes, as both of us are mothers, so both of us have this other huge time consumption. And then trying to be a graduate student, sometimes it feels like a full-time job managing your illness. So there's all these factors that when we're looking into the accommodations, it's incredibly hard to meet all of those compliance things. And even when you're trying to get other levels of access, a lot of times what that ends up happening is we hope the professor will be understanding, and that's not always the case either. So I think what these types of conversations have, or even thinking that when you talked about projects, how can we build spaces that have the conversation of creating a different way of access and care that's beyond what the institution already has in place? How can we rethink what it means to write a syllabus without these strict attendance policies? You know, and a lot of times we put them in place because we think a student might be fibbing or whatever. Well, what happens if we assume students aren't fibbing at the get-go, and they have lives and they have other things that are going on in their worlds? You're here because you want to work, so how can we help you get the work done, right? Are we here to have these strict points, or are we here to help get an education or points across? So how can we restructure what care and access looks like as a project? Like, can we have a meeting for that, not just for like physical things, but for rethinking and pulling in these students who have had these experiences, rethinking what our access or our rules for syllabi and things of that nature look like?
Absolutely. And that was one of the attentions around, and I didn't finish my thought there, was around the Accessibility Resource Center, because it really does need to go beyond accommodations, and certainly it goes beyond physical accommodations. So the other part is we created a department specifically for student equity. And then we are working now, we're still building our staff. Like I said, I came a year and a half ago and we made this big change, and we started it in September. So it's taken some time. And we're being intentional about taking the time because we want it to be something that's sustainable and not something that's a flash in the pan and not going to have the intended impact. But part of that student equity office is the org chart actually has someone dedicated to graduate student equity for the reasons you're just describing, because we do recognize that there are specific needs that graduate students, and I'll say even beyond that, you know, and it's funny because I saw this on the news this morning, but I was in a meeting with a lot of UT system schools a few weeks ago, and we were talking about, you know, students we label as quote unquote non-traditional students are becoming our majority. And so we really do need to rethink our approach to educating students who don't come fresh out of high school with, for the most part, without additional responsibilities like families and like jobs and so forth, and really think about what those needs are. And again, those are best defined by the people who are living those lives every day and having the experiences every day. And those are some of the things that our student equity department is going to be working on. First of all, getting the voices from the survey following up with any listening sessions and focus groups. We have a Student Diversity Advisory Council that I encourage folks to think about becoming part of. Carrie and I have talked about setting up an advisory council specifically for the ARC that we can get feedback from folks to specifically address accessibility challenges. What you described in that syllabus, I hope you will send that to me because that has to stop. That cannot happen. And so we need to nip that in the bud immediately. We also, through our Equity Policy Education Department, which is also a new department, we're working with our partners in ISET HR Provost's office because we want to partner with the ARC to be able to educate faculty about not only it being the right thing to do, but if folks can't do things because it's the right thing to do, point them to what the legal requirements are. And to make sure that all of our students are in a climate and an environment where you all can succeed and not face these extra barriers that are undue burdens on you. So yes to everything you said, Cynthia, is basically my short answer. That's where we're going. That's been a lot of the intentionality about how we have restructured ourselves so that we can better serve the needs of our entire campus community.
And also too, Cynthia, when you register with our office, and any kind of documentation that you do have, we can review on. We also do temporary accommodations as well. So I do encourage you to reach out to us if you need temporary accommodations while you do get some documentation, because it does take time and we recognize that. Our office does recognize that there are times that getting into a specialist may be 3 to 4 months, or that may be not into your next appointment. So we do work with that. So please do reach out to our office and we'll be happy to assist you.
But I'm also interested in exploring ways that we can support, like you said, the financial barriers. If you are living on a, basic living stipend, how the extra cost of specialists or other care, medications, all of those things impact your ability to show up and to be able to provide even the basic documentation that's needed. So that is something I'm very interested in taking a deeper dive in. And if you don't mind, I'd love to talk to you more about that.
Also, too, I encourage you to look at the emergency fund that's available to students, because we have had a lot of students that have used that to be able to get documentation for us as well. And that's through the Dean of Students.
I think Sammy had her hand up. Did I see you? Did you want to add something?
Sorry.
Yeah. No, I just wanted to say, like, this is a really important and timely discussion because I'm not sure if anybody is aware of what's happening to ATEC graduate students right now, specifically the PhDs. In the past 2-3 years, we have never had the obligation to have summer TA work in order to receive our stipends. This is the first summer that we've had access to free SHIP. So there's some things going on with our healthcare benefits that are really creating a lot of situations that we shouldn't be coming up against as graduate students, I think. And this is I want to use this as a broad example, not just like a specific concern. So this is like a way that we are not thinking about students and how breakneck changes in policy really impact us. And so because of the mandatory TA assignment, we have to take on that assignment if we want to retain our healthcare benefits and our stipend. Again, this has never been the case. So what's the danger in this is that a lot of us who are, we work with or we have disabilities, and we have to live around that. We put off healthcare until the summer when it's better to take care of our bodies because we have more time. And then also we had the assumption that we were going to be paid and we were going to have access to our healthcare. However, if, like, for example, I go and have the surgery that I need to have this summer, that puts me out of commission and puts me in a position where I may or may not be able to work. So if I was to deny, like to not take the summer opportunity to retain my pay and health insurance, then I'm, it's a punishment, it's a penalty in that case. And there are other students, not just me, that are having to deal with these issues. And it's difficult. And I want to recognize what somebody said in the chat about how getting a diagnosis in the first place is a privilege. And it's been really frustrating for me to get a diagnosis, to then have that diagnosis revised, and then to go back to the original diagnosis. And so, like, these things all take time, right? These things have been experiences that I've had to deal with on the fly since I started school, honestly. But we don't know what's going to happen in the future, right, to any of our bodies. And so it gets really difficult when we start to make changes so quickly that we then cannot compensate for on our end. And I also think that there's like this really weird, awkward gray area where, like, students like Cynthia and I, we aren't just students, we're faculty too. And so our the way that we kind of fall into the system, it becomes a little bit more complicated, and it doesn't get looked at in the whole entirety that it needs to be.
Oh, thank you for that. And unfortunately, I don't have an answer for you. I did take notes, and it is something I will take back to our leadership to make sure it's on the radar. I'm not familiar with the TA policies. I know in other conversations we've had around students who are also employees, the general rule has been that student status takes precedence over employee status, if I'm not mistaken. But in terms of that very specific example you gave, and again, I thank you for that, about how the policy around the summer work is impacting so much more. I will take that back to our leadership team and see what can be done. It seems reasonable that there would be an opportunity for exceptions, especially in extenuating circumstances, as you've described. Part of that, I think, is making that information available so folks like you will know, how do I go about requesting this, or where do I go, or who do I talk to? And that's something I believe our office can help bridge the gap on.
I wonder, Ann Fisher has asked in the chat if there are other graduate students in the audience, if anybody, has a similar or a very different experience from your own department. Maybe also, since we're closing in on 1 o'clock, I thought also I could ask if there are people in the audience who have questions or contributions that they think, would open this up some more, or help us to dive deeper for you, and so forth. So you're welcome to post any questions in the chat, but I think Professor Fisher's question is really to other graduate students.
And Dr.
Alexandra.
Warren also.
Oh, yes. Yeah, Dr. Warren, I don't know
answer.
if you wanted to speak directly with Sammy, or if you wanted to talk about that here.
Perhaps it's useful to talk about it here, because I think it does impact more than just the ATech PhD students who are kind of, I think, impacted in a new way this summer. But if it's okay, I'll just say a few words, and thank you, Sammy, for raising the concern. Yeah, so in this particular example, we're talking about a group of graduate students, the ATech PhD students, who are guaranteed summer employment, which is a wonderful thing. In the past, summer employment has been able to be offered as RA-ships, which is also a wonderful thing. And I'll just clarify that both RA-ships and TA-ships require a 20-hour-a-week commitment on average, and in-state residence in Texas, right? So in the past, RA-ships were available, and that was great. And unfortunately, the funding for RA-ships is now expired in our school, and we've had to honor that summer employment commitment by offering TA-ships instead. So although the commitment to, the hourly work, right, so the time commitment and the in-state residence commitment have not changed, the nature of the work has changed a little bit. And I've worked really hard with students to try to accommodate any previous schedules or, issues that they've had. I've worked one-on-one with a number of students to try to make that possible, so it doesn't really impact their health and their plans for the summer. But unfortunately, that was a change we had to make. I will say, however, that thinking about graduate students overall across the university, we've seen a great improvement, which is the graduate students who are TAs and RAs now receive student health insurance for free from the university. So the university new this year pays for student health insurance. This is a huge win, and we're really happy about it. Unfortunately, however, it's a 9-month contract. So most TAs and RAs are on a 9-month contract, and they only receive that student health insurance for 9 months. So if you do not have summer employment, you do not have health insurance over the summer through the student health insurance program, unless you cover that gap with your own funds. So very fortunately, ATech PhD students are guaranteed summer employment, so they do have summer health insurance. However, right, that has to come in the form of a TA-ships. Many students, and I would gather most graduate students, this is to your point, Dr. Pearson, the question I think we should take further up the chain to leadership is, can we provide an affordable way for students to close the gap? And this, again, TAs and RAs, to close the gap on student health insurance, which is not covered over the summer. Or can we even fund them over the summer, even if they don't have employment? I think that would be the university-wide solution that would benefit all students, regardless of their employment status in the summer. Thanks so much for raising this concern and allowing me to address it.
Thank you for that.
We had a hand up. We had Alexandra. Did you put your hand down? I've lost your hand.
Yes, hi. I saw that Dr. Warren would be speaking, so I ceded. I didn't want that just sitting there. Hello, hi. My name is Alexandra Perkle. My pronouns are they, them. I am the communications manager for the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. If for some reason you can't see me, I am a white femme presenting person with a curly blonde bangs and a black headset, and I'm wearing a purple long sleeve dress. So yeah, thank you all so much for sharing your experiences as PhD students, as someone who is applying for grad school for 2024 to go back for my PhD. I appreciate the perspective as a disabled person. Like both of you, I have a chronic illness that has the fluctuations that come with that fun party. I tell my doctors my body is a party, so I empathize. My question is, what advice do you have for folks like me who are in the process of, vetting programs and vetting schools as potential places for, pursuing a PhD in terms of disability, accessibility, universal design?
See it.
Yeah. Oh, Sammy or Cynthia, do you want to answer that? And then I have some, I can also contribute, but.
Yes, yes. So I would say my big question when I started the program before I committed to it was, what is the graduate culture like the graduate student culture? Because I find so often that the most support that I get in terms of like just like anytime that I'm struggling or anything like that is through my own peers. And so like it was really important for me to understand that my peers wanted to be connected in the same way that I wanted to be connected, and that we would support one another, and also advocate for one another. So to elevate people's voices that are sometimes not heard as often because of various, identity aspects. So whether it's, maybe they're an international student or maybe they're disabled. So, knowing that like I have a good group of peers that are willing to speak up on my behalf if I don't feel comfortable, that's been really useful for me personally. For example, Cynthia, when I was struggling with the language on that syllabus, I took it to her because at that point she knew that she was going to be in disability studies far before I did. And, I said, this seems wrong, but, can you tell me? And she was just like, oh, that's super wrong. So like she helped push that through to some other people who could have, that made it part of a conversation. And that was something that I didn't necessarily feel comfortable with where I was at in the program, but she's so wonderful that she did. And so I would say, yeah, like see what that graduate culture is like, see what the other students that are going through the same things or similar things as you are going through, and just make sure that you're going into a group of people that really care.
Yeah, I would second that. Like I have a graduate student watching my son right now, so I could be here. So you'll find sort of your tribe and your people. When COVID first started, I ended up leaving school before everyone else. As far as like, we had that spring break and we're not coming back, and now we're really not coming back. A couple weeks before then, I had to stop attending because I was at such high risk. And we didn't really know a whole lot, but there were graduate students that were bringing food and groceries to my front door. Like there was such a huge swell of support, making sure I was connected because things weren't online yet, bringing me notes, telling me what was happening in class. So there are accommodations through the school, but you also tend to find like your tribe of people. And it's not just the peers, it's also the professors. You find those who will support you. Dr. Banner was one of the first faculty that really made me feel empowered to put my body first. I was having a lot of health issues when I first came on, and I remember being late to her class and she's like, you need to take care of yourself first. Like we can get to the material, but your body comes first. And just hearing a professor echo something like that back to me really made me go, oh wait, I can keep doing this, but I have to find the people that are right for me. And in some ways that makes education somewhat inaccessible, right? Because we do have some professors like this one syllabi, which Sammy and I did report quite extensively and fought with, and we were ultimately told like it's the professor's choice through all of the channels, right? And I've had the same experience, similar to how we thought that the default should be the student. When I was looking for accommodation, because I was faculty and I was student, no one would answer. So I think there's a lot of ways. There's assumptions of how some things should work, but you're going to need the support from your other people to help you like keep fighting through it and going through it, and also just to like really have joy in other moments too and feel empowered and excited. So yeah, I think Sammy's right. It's the people that are around you that will really benefit you more than anything the institution could do.
Yeah, and I'll just also add from my own experience in graduate school, which was also when I became invisibly disabled myself. First of all, I guess now that I think about it, I had a disabled elder at the university who was in a certain administrative position and was able to flip around a fellowship year and a TA year for me without any hassle. He just did it when I told him what I was going through. I didn't have a diagnosis, et cetera. So, but there was also a budding disability studies group of faculty across the campus who were really putting an effort, not just into building a field, right? And sort of making sure that, there were a lot of conversations, conferences and so forth happening on campus, but just through the very presence and the discussions that people were having, there was a strengthening of the kind of culture of thinking deeply about what it means to be disabled on campus. So, personally, I might also, or as a professor, I might also recommend to you that you, as you're looking at the various campuses that are calling out to you, just see if they have some disability studies stuff going on of any kind, because then you get a sense that there's some kind of institutional support and probably a culture of talking about access that is just going to end up benefiting you all around.
Thank you all so much. Appreciate it.
Do we have other questions from our 47 participants? Yes, Pia, go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much for sharing all of these perspectives. I'm a little bit dizzy from everything. I'm curious from those of you, I think we have more people in the audience who live with different versions of normal. And I'd love to hear from them. But for me personally, as mainly at the university and the capacity of staff, I'm curious, we've talked about physical issues, we've talked about classroom issues. Are there things that those of us who interact with students in other ways should think about and can be helpful with? I've moved around the furniture in my office so that it is there's room for a wheelchair to come in, and so that somebody's support dog can fit and have a space to be. But are there other things that we can do?
I'll go ahead and go real quick. I think also too that we need to remember there are a lot of hidden disabilities that are out there, and chronic illness is one of them. And then on top of that, we got mental health. We have a lot of students that are identifying mental health to our office, and that is one of our targets, is that we have a lot of individuals that have disabilities that their secondary is the primary before COVID. And then it switched where now we have mental health as their primary, and then their physical disabilities or medical condition becomes their secondary. And so I really feel like that is very convenient. So everybody to remember that we have BATE to refer someone in your classroom that you feel that may not be coming to class. Maybe their behavior is a little bit different and you can tell there's something going on. Refer them, because they will get referred to our office or to the counseling center or to the resources that they need on campus. And we really want to make sure that multi-team approach to them really looks at their well-being. They will be contacted. They will have a contact person on campus. And I really encourage that, because I think that's one area that we're noticing with our students. We're really taking more time to be with them to make sure that they're okay. And so that's my 2 cents right now on that, but I really want to make sure that we're not forgetting that there are hidden disabilities out there, and some of them are so severe that we need to be able to make sure that we're meeting all the needs of the students, especially in the classroom.
Yeah, and I'll add to that about just, I think, the awareness part, as Carrie said, the invisible disabilities, and not only about just the disabilities themselves, but the nature of the disabilities, how they present these complications that are not something textbook, or as Cynthia said, you can't go down an accommodations checklist and your day may be wonderful today, but at 3 o'clock, something happens and you have a flare, or you have something that goes on that doesn't allow you to show up 100%. And so I think not just for staff, but for faculty, again, going back to how we envision the Accessibility Resource Center operating, is that we're getting to the point of providing these resources for folks to educate themselves about these different areas so that we can best serve our students, our faculty, and our staff. And I want to go back to Pia's comment, because thinking about, in a lot of higher education environments, you hear a lot about students and faculty, but we're also thinking about our staff members and what our staff members experience in their own journeys if they have different types of disabilities. And so all of that is part of what we're working to build out and advance. Our Equity Policy Education Administration unit is in the process of developing different types of toolkits, and they span everything from equitable and inclusive communications to equitable and inclusive events, to all of these different considerations that will just help us to make our campus more inclusive of our full community.
Great, thank you all. Ann Fisher has posted another question asking about the perspectives of undergraduate students. Are there access barriers in student housing, classrooms, recreational opportunities, on-campus programming? And I'm going to say ... Are there, yeah.
Yes, we do work with a lot of students that are in housing, as well as students in other parts of campus. Also, too, just to also remind everybody that's also on this call is that we also provide the accommodation for the Archer Center, for the Archer program, the fellowship program that's at Washington, D.C., and then all the satellite campuses that we have on this university, such as Collier Center, as well as the behavioral brain health. So we're not just for campus. We're also for those areas, as well as for housing. We do get a lot of housing requests, and each one of them are going to be case by case with the individual. And we do have some students that need private rooms because they may not be able to, because they have a chronic illness, they may not be around other people, or someone that's on the that has autism. Maybe we need to look at what their environment's going to be in their housing, because it is a social situation that can be impacted. So we look at each one of them case by case. Unfortunately, a lot of people will say, what is the accommodation you provide? One thing that we need to remember, every one of them is going to be specific to their need. And that's what we want. We don't want a textbook accommodation that just fits for all. It's going to be specific. So we work with the families as well on doing accommodation. It may be that they don't need to come their first semester. They come to university for their first semester, but live at home so that they get used to that transition before they go into a housing situation. So we try to take that very seriously on every aspect of their college career here on campus and how it's going to impact them.
And I'll hop in. I love what Mary Jo put in the chat, and that is, a lot of times, so I think there's a lot of learning that has to happen around disability. I think some folks are of the mindset that everybody who's disabled is born with a disability, not realizing different ages of onset and all of these other pieces. And part of the challenge is what Mary Jo put in the chat is, folks who were diagnosed with disabilities before coming to college. In the K-12 system, you have a team of folks that are there putting together and executing your IEP with your parents, with your counselors, with your teachers, and so forth. And then when you transition to college, it becomes a self-advocacy situation. And so some folks are having to advocate for themselves for the very first time. Or I've seen folks who have had their disability onset in college. A good friend of mine in particular, I remember the journey we went through with her with a diagnosis of bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, and the challenges that presented as she navigated school and had to figure out how to take the next step even. And so, so making people aware of things like that, providing resources and tools to help students self-advocate. I know the other thing that I see a lot is that folks don't want to, and I've seen this not just in students, but in faculty and staff as well. Folks don't want to seek the services of an office. Even if they need the accommodations, they'll try to struggle through it because in a lot of cases, there's this stigma associated with having a disability, or people thinking that, okay, if I request this kind of accommodation, people are going to think that I'm trying to game the system, and they won't seek the accommodations they very much need because of that negative association. And so that's the other place that I see us really being able to make some impact. In the last part of Mary Jo's message talks about just how we handle situations discreetly. Nobody should ever be put on display or there for show or whatever. And I know our team members, I'm thinking of Alexandra in particular, with witnessed at a particular event with a speaker who was supposed to be an expert in equity and inclusion, and how they made a spectacle of someone in the audience and a spectacle of disability overall. And that's just not the thing to do. So again, the types of education and resources and best practices that we're pulling together for the campus will hopefully help with a lot of those things.
I'm glad to know it wasn't at UTD.
It was not at UTD. Thank you for adding that, Alexandra.
Yeah, didn't want people making assumptions.
I'm wondering if people have additional questions or if our graduate students have sort of closing thoughts. Oh, would someone talk a bit about universal design? Oh, Carrie, would you like to, or would the graduate students? I like to strut their stuff.
Go ahead, Sammy.
No, rock, paper, scissors.
We both have strong feelings about it, but Sammy is the design, like, amazing person. So let's give her, you go, and if I have anything to add, I'll add.
I'm sure you'll have lots to add. I am not actually, I'm like, so I know from a position of actually practicing, right? I am a designer. And so I can identify what's wrong with universal design. Actually, I can tell you what's wrong with universal design every day, all day. But like, as far as coming up with actual tangible ways to think about like solutions, design solutions, that is to make it better, to make universal design better. So universal design is often positioned as being this equalizing and kind of all-encompassing way that we can fix the built environment for people. However, this design in general, the way that it's done, is really problematic because it's based on the average normative body. So if we're already taking our metrics and applying it for the average normative body, then we're really not designing for everybody, are we? So universal design in and of itself has a lot of issues. The solution is like what Dr. Pearson was talking about, is getting people in on the conversation, looking at the way people are experiencing the built environment and getting their feedback, getting people who are impacted by this built environment. That is the information that designers need. And we need to be building the world with people, not for people. So we can't just like think of universal design as like this blanket solution to the problem, because universal design has a lot of problems in and of itself. So we have to be able to question the systems and to question the way that we go about things, even the ways that we try to solve the problem. We have to constantly question and build off of what we're finding. That's my soapbox, at least.
Yeah, I think that's great. And it's such a hard concept because universal design sounds really great and really important, but it ends up doing that average, that Sammy's talking about, or a lot of times the phrase we hear is that most people try to reach the most people the fastest, and that ends up excluding a lot of people. And who does that become? It becomes the typical able-bodied person. Even in my world, I'm an artist first. Something as simple as when I teach art courses at UT, trying to teach accessible type, accessible installation, like working with gallerists. In my work, like accessibility is a huge conversation, but trying to get a gallery or other artists to understand accessibility issues it's something they're not concerned with, or they don't think that. Again, it becomes that conversation of how can I reach the fastest. So it's a great idea if it's done really well, but there's a lot of work about what we think that means. So even design for disability, it becomes problematic and things like that. But so one of the things I always do when I'm doing either public art, which is the world I know, when I'm trying to make accommodating, or when I'm designing a course to teach, I always ask myself, like, who do I imagine taking this course and how can I meet their needs? And then I keep pushing beyond it, or I reflect onto other peers and things like that. Like I said, even just something as simple as the type we pick in our PowerPoints is, thinking through those ideas. But yeah, I think it's something that I don't even know if the design world has the right answer yet. But we're figuring it out. And Sammy's actually taught me a lot. So I'm actually glad that question's been asked, because I kept seeing it in the chat and I was like, oh no.
Well, I'm a civil and environmental engineer by training. And so this is one of my soapboxes as well. And I love what Dr. Huxtable Jester put in the chat. It's a starting point. And I mentioned if it's done well, and it really has to be. I say user-centered because sometimes when you try to go farther to what I think it should be community-driven, community-led. Especially in my world as the engineers, where the engineers believe that we have all the knowledge and we can come in and we can identify your problem and solve it for you. So talking to my colleagues in the engineering community to say, nope, that's not the way you do it, has been a challenge and very much a labor of mine. So I'm actually proud to say, and I shared an article in the chat that I wrote for our Professional Engineers magazine a few years back. But through my professional society, the American Society of Civil Engineers, we've made some strides over the years to change our policies and our code of ethics. So now if you look at the ASCE Code of Ethics, you'll see very intentional language about society as a stakeholder and the need to include diverse perspectives in the planning and performing of our work. You'll see language even going beyond that to say respecting and valuing and taking into consideration traditional and cultural heritage of communities. So we're not coming in and trying to Americanize everything or ableize everything or what have you. And ASC is a global organization with over 150,000 members. So we can't just have a one-size-fits-all approach. We have to be able to serve the work with the societies to develop solutions that are going to meet the needs. And I'll take a step farther and go back and say, we don't even know a lot of times what the problems are. So we need to be asking the communities, whether it's a physical community that we're located in or communities of individuals with different identities. Those are the folks who define the problems, because we might see something as a problem that's, hey, this is good for us, and I've had that happen to me as an individual. And so that's all a part of it. It really should be community or user, at the very least centered, but certainly led or driven by those communities.
Thank you all for that rich elucidation of universal design. Pia, I hope that was helpful. I hope it was helpful to everybody. Well, I'm wondering, personally, I am starving. I need to teach a class shortly. And I'm wondering if anybody has any burning closing remarks they'd like to make, or questions to ask. And if not, I believe somebody's doing an outro. Is that correct?
Yes, and that would be me. This is Pia, often lurking member of the Teaching Collective, and working in the School of Arts, Humanities, and Technology with the former Arts and Humanities and the former ATEC graduate students. I'm so grateful to have been here today with everybody and to have learned so much. And I have a long list of questions that I'll be working on, and growth for me and for all of us, I think. I'm heartbroken about some of the stories that I've heard. I think we all are. I'm humbled by the willingness of y'all to share your experiences and teach us all about what the world looks like from different here's, right? And the different kinds of normal we can have. I'm also uplifted and hopeful because I see a lot of goodwill and interest and curiosity and trying to do things differently, both practically and at a sort of conceptual and theoretical level. And I hope that work continues for all of us, and that we may have more teach-ins on these topics as time goes. And I look forward to the survey that's going on. There are a lot of links in the chat that you can go back to support us by subscribing to the mailing list. You can find the previous events on YouTube. Usually they're posted within a week. You can support us, as somebody mentioned, by donating. We try to fund our speakers and not take their time, knowledge, and labor for granted. And finally, there is a link somewhere to share your feedback. And finally, just a huge thank you to our speakers, Cynthia O'Neill, Samantha Wellwood, Dr. Olivia Banner, Carrie Tate, and Dr. Yvette Pearson, and everybody who made this happen. Thank you all. Thank you for being here and for making me feel hopeful about the future. See you on at our next event, Friday, April the 14th at noon, and a teach-in on environmental justice. I look forward to that. So y'all take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for inviting us. And thank you, Cynthia and Samantha.
Thanks for having us.